Advent Calendar by Rowan Williams. He will come like last leaf's fall, one night when the November wind has flayed the trees to the bone and earth wakes choking on the mold, the soft shrouds folding. He will come like frost, one morning when the shrinking earth opens on mist to find itself arrested in the net of alien sword-set beauty. He will come like dark, one evening when the bursting red December sun draws up the sheet and penny masks its eye to yield the star-snowed fields of sky. He will come, will come, will come, like crying in the night, like blood, like breaking, as the earth writhes to toss him free. He will come like child.
Thank you. Okay, we can go back to the gallery view. Okay, so I just found Rowan Williams. Hey, Lewis. Hey, Pamela. I just found the Rowan Williams poem and thought it was quite beautiful because it was set in Advent and certainly in a dark and harsh winter. But of course, he ends with, he will come like child. And in Mark's gospel, there is no child. As we begin the Gospel of Mark and as we begin the Gospel of John, unlike Matthew and Luke, there are no infancy narratives. So when we approach the story of the Incarnation, we will not get a child. We will get something else altogether. So what I'm going to do tonight is to present briefly a document and then a set of adjunct art slides, just so you can see what my approach is going to be. And then we'll concentrate on a few slides that have art, but also questions. And what I'm doing is presenting Mark actually as an Advent calendar, which is, I've never done it that way before, but what it has done for me, and I hope it will help you do, is see the Gospel of Mark through a series of events, portraits, images that may come to mind. So here we go with the first document. Whoops. Huh. Okay, good. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Mark's Gospel has been called the first story because we know that it was the earliest, we believe. I guess everybody's, Michael, can you mute everyone for right now so we don't get any feedback? Thank you.
Okay, now, Linda, you will have to now unmute yourself.
Now, all right, great, thank you. All right, so Mark's Gospel is believed to be the earliest gospel, and it's been called by scholars the first story. I think it was Diana Butler Bass who said it's a passion narrative with an extended introduction. It is a gospel of secrets. I believe that the entire gospel is a nativity narrative, a story about the birthing of God's kingdom through the pain of all things being cast down. And I would call it the setting, the labor and delivery room. In contrast to Matthew, Mark's Jesus's teaching is in the doing unlike Matthew, where we hear parable after parable and teaching after teaching, what we see in Mark is Jesus doing things, healings, exorcisms, extending hope and rescue. So his teaching is more about example than words, and more about action than lecture. And he's not an answer guy in this gospel. In fact, he will not answer all of our questions at all. And he teaches by dying. The gospel shows how it is often that the characters on the margins are the ones who recognize and understand Jesus without any special prompting or explanations. There is a sense of not a lot of descriptive narrative. It is short, it is spare, it has a sense of urgency. He uses the word immediately 39 times in this short gospel. We believe that about the time of the writing of this text, the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, and the Jewish people were broken, feeling broken in both body and spirit, as they confronted the unthinkable, the fact that God, who dwelt in their midst, in the sanctuary, in the tabernacle, that was no longer their reality. So we get a sense from Mark's gospel that there's a compelling need to respond, to redefine, reimagine where God is. And certainly the Jewish people had known what it meant to carry God in their heart. But this is going to be a bit of a challenge. Now, Mark is a gospel about power, and you can read it with that lens. Look at who has it, how it's released, how it's confronted, and how it's shared. And Jesus will engage all of the powers over humanity, even the power of death. And as we said, there's no infancy narrative, there are no sentimental scenes, but there is adult wisdom about God, who will cite God's presence in people, not in institutions or in buildings. And in fact, in Mark's gospel, Jesus does talk about the buildings being destroyed. So we get from Mark that the world is a dangerous place, and faith will ask us to live into the mystery of God's unfolding future, because the gospel itself ends in mystery, with a sense of living on the margins and wondering where Jesus will be seen. So there are a couple of ways in which I thought that this gospel might approach Christmas or the season of Incarnation, and I hope that we'll discover more as we go along. For a Christmas setting, we know that presents are usually kept secret until opening day, and that gifts of love are sources of revelation of needs or wants that have been seen. We can tell that those on the margins would be included in Mark's Christmas scene had there been one, because those in the margins are certainly part of the population of Mark's gospel. The shepherds, the foreigners, the humble birthplace, the power of empire beyond the doors. Secrets are revealed through angel messengers to the lowly. So our Christmas practice sends messages to those both near and far, and we remember the poor, the children, those who are suffering in hospital or nursing homes. And the assurance of Emmanuel, God with us, is to be found where the lowly dwell. I still don't have an advent calendar. Melissa has one that's full of marzipan. But I haven't been able to find one that doesn't have chocolate or perfume or cheese or something in it. So I'm made my own. And if we're going to create an advent calendar for Mark's gospel, I've listed a bunch of the doors that we might open. A picture of John the Baptist, a baptism scene in the Jordan, and on and on and on. And I've got several little paragraphs about that. And we're going to go through some of those. Calls to action in Jesus' name include confronting the death-dealing powers of illness and disability, of ignorance and injustice, of opposition to the good. So that the portrait of incarnation in this gospel names the truth of the troubles of the world and works to change them. So it means confrontation with darkness, or what we would label injustice. And there is no one excluded from this mission, including foreigners and children. To celebrate Christmas with Mark, we might send money to agencies or charities that help others, such as RIP medical debt. We might deliberately walk with those whose lives are ending and determine that we are a sign of God's loving presence to them, both now and in the eternal future. There is a sense in Mark's gospel that the one who shatters is the one who gives new life. But this new life does not look like the old one. So I wanted to share a little story about how after the birth of one or two of, or maybe all three of my children, I can't remember, I found myself in the obstetrician's office, and I asked him when my hips would go back to the size that they were before I gave birth, because I wanted to fit back into the clothes that I had in my closet. And he just started to laugh at me and said, "They will never go back. This is the shape you've got now." And that's sort of Mark's gospel too. But the new life, the new shape, will not be able to look like the old one. So perhaps we would set him in a rural cottage, or cottage in Canada, or a cabin somewhere, because that's where the margins are of civilization. That's where you can encounter creation. But at the same time, perhaps he's going to pitch his tent near the soup kitchen or the health clinic downtown. Perhaps if he has a Christmas tree, it would be a live one that he could plant. And at his feast table, all of the disciples would be responsible for this food. You give them something to eat, he has told them more than once. And perhaps the music playing would be Handel's Messiah, so we get some echoes of promise. Or maybe there'll be some favorite Advent hymns there. But there would be also some sound effects like groaning and urges to breathe. Sarah Rudin, who has a new translation of the Gospels, calls it the inauguration. And we are to pay attention to a birth that is in and among us. There might even be a protest sign in the yard, a movement to sign a petition, or another thanks for essential services for those who've tended us during this laborious ordeal of our own during COVID. But perhaps someone like Joe would be drafting a resolution for diocesan convention, which urges action toward beloved community. And you will hear more about that from him as we go along. So my opening prayer: help us, O God, as we fall into your story, to open its Advent doors, to hold its silence and mystery, and rejoice as it readies itself to be birthed again. Amen. All right. So that's my overall frame for the Gospel of Mark. Kind of pithy, kind of action-oriented, kind of early, kind of spare. Certainly, as we had heard about the Gospel of Matthew, it is a gospel on the margins, with a confrontation with powers, power over, and converting that to power with and power for. So I'm going to show you now I have two sets of slides. Let me just explain. One is an adjunct set of slides, and I'm going to run through those just very quickly so you can see what I was thinking when I was putting together this calendar. And we're not going to stop in particular on any of these images. I just want to give you a sense that of some of the art that's available. And if you're interested, you can put your email in the chat box to Michael, if he could keep a list for me, or you can email me directly and I'll send you the slides if you want. But if that's too much for you, I will understand because it took me about a month to put those together. And then we will go to the slides for this evening because those slides have comments. So here's, whoops, let's get out of this. Okay. Okay, so this is what, these are what the adjunct slides look like. Just so you can get an idea of what I was thinking about. Okay, so did you get a different sense of Mark's gospel from the art that I chose just in that brief little run through? What was your impression of Mark's gospel?
Well, I loved it. I was very taken with the images, and I'm not quite sure where you got that. Did you do those? I don't know.
I did some of them,
Yeah.
and I got some of them from old kind of magazines about the Christian life. One was called The Other Side. So the burden, the woman carrying the huge stone, I got from that magazine. The orange shirt children, everyone counts or not. I did that piece. I did the piece on the baptism of Jesus. But I tried to mix and match and not overdose you with my stuff. So
Well, I particularly like just the ones that really jumped out at me were Jesus and the children, and then the Gethsemane prayer. I can just see Jesus not wanting to do what he was getting ready to have to do, and just abject, sacrifice, I guess, or dismay, or whatever, that he has to go through this. But
yeah,
well, we know he did. So
yeah,
right.
that was a collage. I put it on a background that I had painted earlier, so you would get the kind of the right color, because in the chapel in the Garden of Gethsemane, it's perpetual twilight inside that church, and it feels like the color purple all the time. And there's the sound of water and sound of weeping, and an olive tree that's over 2,000 years old right outside the door. So that's why the branches are part of that prayer time.
Love the heart. I love the heart.
Oh, the heart. Okay.
Yes. And also the stone. Because in Jamaica, we have a song which says, "Mother, that great stone got to move." And I looked and thought, that's it.
So that was the gravestone. Yeah.
Yes.
As opposed to the burden stone, but it could be this.
I think, no, it's
Could be
really
both.
interpreted as a burden stone.
Yeah. Okay.
The lot that women have to carry.
Indeed.
Mm.
Okay.
There's one looked kind of like an Andrew Wyeth, only the person is reaching away from the house instead of the usual scene is, I think the model's name was Christina, reaching up to the house.
Yeah.
But in this one, the person, I'd need to look at it a bit more to see.
Well, I can send it along to you, Patricia,
Yeah.
but that's a good pickup on that. That was not a piece that I did. I found it somewhere, and it's Bartimaeus.
Mhm.
So it's blind Bartimaeus reaching
Yes, yes.
reaching toward Jesus. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Any kind of emotional impression from that?
Well, I think we tend to think of Advent as a sort of jolly time, getting ready for Christmas, but it is actually a very dark time. And, traditionally we were thinking about heaven and hell and death and judgment that were the themes. So we've got a bit more cheerful since then, but I think it's well to remember that it is a solemn time, and certainly a time to get organized and get ready.
It's certainly no longer as much a mini Lent as it used to be, although Jane Williams has written a book on the art of Advent. She's an English cleric, and her book is all about judgment. It's all about a mini Lent, and that's not really how we approach it as much today.
Mhm.
It does seem like that, this process is difficult. It's hard, and it's going to get harder. It's like a birth, right?
Yeah.
But there's a reason for it, just like a birth.
Yes, thank you for picking up on that, Julie. It's labor intense
Mhm.
if we're serious about it. And the spiritual life is not for sissies. So whether it's a discipline of prayer or scripture reading or service in Christ's name, we have to do some work. It doesn't just happen without our participation. And I think in Mark's gospel, there's a lot that we can see that make it hard for people to participate in the full reign of God. And so that's why I think I began to see the whole thing as labor and a yearning for delivery into this new birth and this new way of being with God through Jesus. So if you're ready, we'll go on to the slides with the questions, unless there's something else that somebody would like to say. And again, I can send them to you if you're interested. But you have to take them probably one at a time because they take a while. This will take just a minute.
While you're doing that, I see it's 4 degrees in Ottawa. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Listen, in March, 4 degrees will seem really warm. We haven't even gone much below freezing.
I don't
Not
know
yet.
about that, Patricia. I left on Saturday morning and it was -17 when we got to the airport. It was so cold.
Well, this will warm us up. We'll have a nice warm discussion. Okay, so again, our focus is on incarnation and for this season. And here we go. And everybody can see that, sort of. Mark's gospel begins with a prophet. That's how Mark announces the gospel. So how does that set you up for a proclamation about God? What does that say to you about the writer's agenda, if this is the way he starts? I mean, somebody said, I think it was Patrick or Truman, who said that stories start one of 2 ways: a stranger comes to town or a man goes on a journey. In Mark's gospel, John announces who he is and who he is not, and who we're waiting for. So, when do you begin making ready for Christmas?
Anytime there's mention of John the Baptist, it makes me think of the promises that are taken at baptism. And every now and then I like to remind myself of them because it's a good way to think of living your life.
The baptismal covenant, and he's not yelling at you.
Yes, exactly. No tender baby days.
Yeah, okay. And one of the pieces I read, it said that wilderness means the place of speaking. The place of speaking. I'm sorry, Megan, did you say something?
When you had asked about why might, how does beginning with the prophet signal Mark's agenda? It just makes me wonder if maybe he's not wanting us to then see this through the eyes and ears of what the prophets had been saying for centuries.
It's possible. He does it a little differently than Matthew does. And Matthew's audience was more Jewish in background and had more familiarity with things that didn't need to be explained, like the prophets. So this could be, and we know that Matthew and Luke both used Mark as a source for the material, partial source for the material for the Gospels. But wilderness, what does that remind all of you about wilderness? What does wilderness signal to the people who had been in exile?
Of vulnerability, uncertainty. And then with Jesus later, openness to that.
And there would be also, I think, here in that vulnerability, Susan, that there would also be a waiting for deliverance. So the time of being in the wilderness would be a time of looking for respite or refuge or release.
Thing I have thought about with John the Baptist is that he had to go into the wilderness. You know, if I remember right, I believe he came from or the speculation is that he came from a fairly well-to-do family and a family where he was expected to be in the Jewish faith, I think. And,
well, in the priestly lineage, yes.
Priestly lineage, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Elizabeth, yeah, right.
Yeah, and so he had to break away, he had to go away. And so I always have kind of a vision of John the Baptist. A number of things come together for me. One is I have a negative view of the wilderness, that he went to something that was forbidding and had to eat bugs and wear a hair shirt all the time. And then I always kind of juxtapose his end, which is pretty gruesome. So I think of him breaking away from comfort and entering the wilderness, and then being a fairly I don't know what the word is, but unpleasant or sharp-edged type of prophet in person. And so there's all these kind of negative things about what he had to go do. And I sometimes think he was trying to jerk people into a thoughtful place where, and of course, this isn't anticipating the birth of Jesus, really. I mean, Jesus is there, and it's kind of anticipating the end of Jesus. But I have a fairly negative feeling about what John the Baptist had to go through. Go to the wilderness, be sharp-edged with people. He did get to baptize them and preach, but then he just seemed like he struggled and had struggled, and in the end was killed in a gruesome way. So that's always been my view of John the Baptist.
Yeah, I think that's right on target. And also, John, it made me think about that his parents were quite old when he was born, and so Elizabeth had given up. And so I'm wondering whether he wasn't orphaned at an early age, and
Right.
whether his lot in life was determined more by circumstance, perhaps. And yet at the same time, we're very aware that he had a sense of other prophets, because his announcements were all about what God intended to do.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think he would be some kind of a cousin of Jesus, right? Is that
Yeah.
So it's one of the great mysteries. We don't know what happened for 30 years. So these two could have been close cousins. They could have been fighting a lot. They could have been sharing many things in life. And so that's something that I've always found kind of fun to speculate. And there are some fictionalized and some more scholarly works that try to guess at what happened in those 30 years. But that obviously shaped John a lot. Who wouldn't be shaped growing up with Jesus as your cousin?
And indeed, as Megan had said, what we have here is an immediate sandwich. All right, we have an immediate sandwich between John and Jesus. So to have this prophet's voice and then have Jesus side by side, the stakes are already kind of set
No, it's
for us.
serious.
Yeah.
Big time, yeah.
So John's the prep guy, you know. So how early do you start preparing for Christmas?
Advent 3. We
Oh,
decorate
Advent
on
3.
Advent 3 and we take the decorations down the night before Epiphany. But
Okay.
it is true, in a priest's household, you live by the liturgical calendar, you know, so we're very conscious of that. But Advent 3.
Advent 3. Okay.
Well, I don't put up Christmas trees till about Advent 3, but I think I'm preparing for Christmas a long, long time before that, because I keep looking at the sky and thinking to myself, maybe this year, maybe this year. And it's a longing that comes on to me probably in October, which is not about singing Christmas carols. It's just a deep sense of hope and longing that this might happen. And then I think it was actually your lesson, your sermon talking about a couple of weeks ago, and I thought to myself, well, you know, maybe the search shouldn't be out there; it should be in me.
Well, it
So
is the
I don't think-
challenge
yeah.
for the exterior world, whether we will acknowledge that our interior world looks like that too. And that's a bit of work. So if we take Rowan Williams' poem with which we started, those images are not comfortable. And it does make us wonder if we can sit in that place until the light comes.
Well, like the pandemic, we're all sort of sitting in a place we would have preferred not to be, and it's going on, and here we are. But we get ready and hope in any case.
Indeed. All right. So let's go back to the, okay, so this is where I just started with week 1. Now, December the 1st is World AIDS Day. There has been some mention of that in the Canadian newspaper, but I don't know that it's big on everybody's horizon. But illness and suffering and those who need care are certainly on Jesus's sightline. There's a lot of healing and tending to the body in Mark's gospel. So this, Josephine's with us this evening. Josephine, do you want to say something about this, this piece of art?
It's a piece of art that comes from Africa, and so it has a slightly different message or a different connotation from here. But for me, it speaks to so many things about people who are held responsible for things that in fact are not theirs to carry. Whether it was AIDS, we have the same thing now. We look for reason, but we actually look for blame, someone to hold responsible, which is neither helpful nor factual in most cases. But it's interesting. I'm not sure why we do that. I sometimes wonder if we do it so we can absolve ourselves of the responsibility. As I say, it doesn't usually result in anything. But these are 2 of 4 panels that were in a piece that was gifted to me.
I like the fact that it's certainly in the top panel. It's not just the patient who's affected by what's happening. So the whole family's there. I know that when I did some mission work in a hospital in St. Lucia, the whole family would come. Then they would come and camp out and bring food and whatever else needed, the patient needed. But it was unthinkable that they could recover without loved ones calling them back to the life that they had known.
And that's both a practical need and a real physical need, because the services are different. But also that the understanding and the responsibility to care for each other spiritually, in general terms, is very different than it is here.
Mhm.
No, today particularly, I'm asking that question about what can I do, and what does the type of pain. This morning at 6 o'clock, I got a call from my gardener and he was weeping. And he said, I can't come today. My grandson has committed suicide. And I felt so helpless. I was at the end of the phone. I couldn't hold him. I couldn't hug him. All I have been able to do is say prayers and phone my cousin and say, this has happened. Please pray for him. And it's a time where he's alone. His wife is away. The parents of the young man are in the States. And I keep thinking to myself, at this season, particularly, how hard it is.
Yeah.
And what can I do? How can I reach out? What type of comfort can I bring? How is it even possible?
I think this is a particularly difficult time for illness, for us to really manage kind of the moods of the day, especially when nothing's in our control. But illness in the midst of us or in us does affect how we approach this season. And I think sometimes it's because there are false expectations. We have decided that God with us means that we're happy, that everything's okay. And sometimes it just isn't. God is still with us, but sometimes illness changes the landscape of our experience of the gospel.
I'm always reminded of our good friend Douglas when it's World AIDS Day. And I spent a lot of time with him in his last days at Bruce House. And one of the times when we went, he said to Roger, I'm not well enough today to visit with you. So Roger was pretty glad because Roger found it really hard to visit. And then he grabbed my hand and he said, you stay here because we have to pray. So I said, well, I pray for you whether I'm with you or not. I know, but I want you here right now praying for me. And it was so Douglas, and I loved it. You know, I have a need and I expect you can fill it, and so fill it.
Just do it.
Yeah, that was Douglas with us, you know. He was very, very special, and we were so happy that he agreed to be our best man because it just made it perfect for us.
That's great.
People here don't know, but Roger and I got married when we were both in our 60s. And it was the best marriage anyone could ever imagine having. For me, I loved him very much. I found a picture today when we went down to Florida after we were married so that he could meet my brother and sister. And we're looking at each other and we're laughing. And I was looking at it and thinking how very, very happy we were and how it was lovely that it was captured there. And finding it today meant a lot to me.
It's part of your Christmas preparation, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, I miss him, but I'm so grateful to have had him. And I do think that he was a gift from God because we met because we were asked to lead a course on Job at St. John's. So I mean,
that's like having supper with John the Baptist and getting married right afterwards. So it's just the same kind of.
It was quite interesting because, as you know, because you knew both of us, we were very, very different. And Roger was brought up Methodist, so he could quote the Bible like you wouldn't believe. But we were all sharing very important things in our life. And he was just quoting the Bible for us. And it got to me. And the second night I said to him, you can't talk again until you talk from your heart. You're lovely at talking from your head, but it's not going to continue. And there was a great in the room. And I thought, I don't care if we're supposed to collate it, you need to get in the program. And he said to me one day after we were married, the thing I loved about you was I knew I might never need to talk again.
Pamela, you're the only one that would say that out loud. I think we've all been in situations where maybe it would have been Jesus with John, John the Baptist, who knows? But
well, I think also of the Christmas pageant that was never written. And I do believe that Roger and I were supposed to be the parents of St. John, of John the Baptist.
Yeah.
And he said to you, I don't really want to say anything. And you said you weren't going to have to.
Zachariah was silent. And Pamela's referring to one year when the Christmas pageant was all adults because somebody, Michael Corrigan, I think it was one of the guys that you quoted recently, Gorillas of Grace, Ted Loder, who had said in a column, well, I don't know why everybody puts all the children in the Christmas pageants because there was only one child there. So one year in the parish, all the adults took all the parts, and all the grandchildren came to see the grandparents in the Christmas manger. So that was a good piece.
It's really special.
So I think it is a challenge not to ignore suffering or pieces that aren't kind of mythical in terms of celebrating the holiday. And it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge because in some years it's our last year with someone we love. So another perspective. In Mark's gospel, Jesus is always walking along borders and boundaries and crossing them, and often at or near the Galilee. So if you travel at Christmas, do you enter familiar or unfamiliar territory?
I think it's both, because I grew up with a tradition that you always had a traditional family-oriented gathering, but that into that gathering, you gathered strangers, lost ones, isolated people, people who may not have family, people who were ill, people who maybe couldn't cook their own dinners. And so there's always that sense of exploration and moving beyond boundaries, because you don't know the people. You get to know them when they come to you and enter your house. And you have to open yourself to them. You don't know what their expectations are, but you want to be able to satisfy them.
So it's more unsettled than settled.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done all different things. Can you hear me okay, Linda? I just
Yeah, great. No, it's good.
Yeah. And different years, different things. I mean, for many years, it was the traditional family Christmas and you went home. And then I've had a few years where I went on a trip by myself and
Right.
it happened to be over Christmas. Christmas was the best time. One Christmas I was in Thailand, you know, on a tour, and another time on a cruise. And that was, they were all good experiences. And you know what I think I liked the best about the ones where I was by myself was you realize your fellow travelers, like in the end, you're all human beings. You all have the same worries on the journey, same, it in a way, a strange way, it made me feel more connected to humanity than if I'd been at home with my family.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I would actually recommend to anybody who's never tried it, not to have a traditional Christmas one year.
Because you're going to learn something about yourself or about others or both, maybe.
Yeah, about the way we connect, you know, it's an interesting experience.
I
Anybody
think
else?
it's interesting that we speak to expectations, because the one thing I increasingly appreciate about Christmas, and because for many years, not necessarily every year, but we often go out to my sister's on Christmas Eve, and that's sort of the beginning. And to me, there's a complete letting go of the expectations, in the sense that I leave behind us all the pressure and the, you know, the chaos and all the rest. And by the time we get in the car and sort of head that direction, and certainly by the time we arrive at the farm, it's done. And nobody really cares what's under the tree, and nobody really cares, but whether you have it or don't have it, or whether you brought it or didn't, like, you're past it now. You're at the farm. And then it's peaceful in a sense. It's chaos of people and animals and things, but there's just a complete letting go, and nobody honestly could care less what was for dinner or what was for breakfast or what was on the table. It's always wonderful. But if it wasn't, I could truly tell you that it would matter not a bit. And that, you know, by the time everybody sort of arrives, I like to go out on the Christmas Eve because I just get that extra. That's my preparation in a sense. I don't get to prepare. I don't feel like I prepare until that point. And then until we leave there to rejoin the world of the city on the way back the next day. But when everybody comes out there, I always feel like it's a bit of an island, a bit of a reprieve from everything else. And maybe it's because everybody's a little bit bigger and it really doesn't matter what you bring or what you have. It's a chance to be together.
Debbie, what's Christmas like in the Hanukkah house?
So we don't travel anymore, but we have people that come to visit us. And my household is a family, a household of my husband's Jewish and I'm Christian, Anglican. And what we found last year, particularly with COVID, we have always had a Christmas dinner here for a number of years, and our kids are growing up, but we felt we wanted to do something last year, but we didn't feel safe, obviously, having people come in the house. So we decided that after watching all the curbside stuff that was going on, that's what we did. And so we cooked a turkey dinner, and we had usually everybody comes with some sort of it's kind of like a bit of a potluck dinner. People still brought their desserts the day before or their side dishes or whatever. And we assembled that morning and everybody came into our garage at different times and picked up their food so that they could take it home. It was totally different than what we've done before. And certainly it wasn't this year. Well, Hanukkah is happening right now, but it was an interesting and wonderful feeling to feel that we still had connected with family and close friends that would typically be sitting around the table. So it was a time where we felt that we were still, even though we couldn't travel and basically nobody in the family was traveling, it was still that opportunity to connect and to be able to share some of our concerns that we'd been having for months on end, all of us. So it was a real eye-opening experience for Mark and I think, but it's something that we really treasure.
Not to be repeated, or maybe to be repeated, who knows?
We think we're going to have just family, and this year we're trying to figure out the numbers right now. We liked doing the curbside last year, but we really would like to see people around the table this year, and we've got a big enough house that I think we can do it, but we're just watching.
Thank you.
Watching the numbers to see what's going to happen.
You know, asking that question, I also think we've had a number of years when my husband's brother and his wife's family, their idea of Christmas is not having to cook. And so they like to go to a hotel. And I am so uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like Christmas. There is no sense of the magnitude of what we're supposed to be celebrating. I don't want to listen to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
15 times.
Santa's coming to town. I have had 4 years of being so uncomfortable because it just didn't seem like Christmas.
So it's a travel, in fact, into foreign territory for you, because it's not your regular emotional or spiritual landscape.
It's the spiritual landscape that's really lacking. You know, crackers and balloons are not Christmas.
Yeah.
They're nice to have, but they're not Christmas.
Jesus was always in Mark's gospel, it seemed to me, just encountering things that were not familiar, people that were not familiar, situations that who knows what his normal was, because we're not told that either. We're just told about his inauguration on the scene and his encounters with people. So it's hard to know where his edges were, but in Mark in particular, he responds to people who have no power over their own lives. So their yes has been eliminated by illness or by, yeah, I guess in Mark's gospel, it's usually by illness, mental illness or physical illness.
When I was working in Shanghai from 95 to 97, the Chinese authorities, the Public Security Bureau, shut down the international churches on Palm Sunday. And so we were obliged to worship at the place where the state approved priests were. And so on Christmas Eve, I think it was Christmas Eve that year, I was in this enormous church in Shanghai, and all of the hymns and carols were in Chinese.
Were the hymn tunes different? Also, when I was in Korea, I could get the cadence of the
Yeah,
the tunes that were familiar, but the words, of course, were beyond me.
you could feel it.
Yeah, you can feel it. Yeah. Patricia.
No,
Oh, okay. Okay.
clearing my throat, sorry. I'll
That's
mute.
allowed. That's allowed.
I had one Christmas where I had to take a rickshaw to go to the midnight service. I was actually going to Catholic service because I had been their choir mistress.
Hmm.
And I couldn't go to the Anglican because it was just too far away to travel to in Dhaka. So I went to the Catholic church. So I got this rickshaw. And the rickshaw driver was very, very confused. If I'm going to celebrate this Christ, shouldn't I be going to a nightclub?
Oh,
He said, you sure you don't want to go to a nightclub? I said, no, I want to go to church.
Yeah.
okay.
So he figured a celebration took place at nightclubs, a party. So I said, well, it's a different type of party, but a party all the same.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So speaking of parties, Dorian, here we are. Certainly this story is common to the Gospels about the loaves and fishes and about what foods we prepare to share. Do we anticipate that some that we encounter are feeling empty, whether it is with loss or sickness or whatever? This is Seeger Coder's art. There's a priest, a Roman Catholic priest who died not so long ago, who has a real sense of what a table looks like. So Jesus was not going to ignore tending to the body and its needs as well. And I know that there are Christmas cakes in my house now that got delivered by friends that one is cured and one is not yet cured, so that I get to feast on that a little bit. And we do have a pattern, I think, of trying to tend to the body's sweet needs at Christmas, or traditional foods, or things that would make us know that this is a time that's not a regular time. It's a different time, that there are certain things that are cooked at this time that aren't cooked at other times during the year. Michael, are you a cook?
I'm a reluctant one.
Yeah. Are there Christmas foods that you need or want or are willing to share?
What I've learned, because I have a fairly large nuclear family, but then a much larger extended family, and I truly have come to like and enjoy whatever is important to the people at the table where I'm gathering. It's the occasion that makes the event, not the menu.
Okay. Lewis? Let's hear from you.
I don't know. We had a tradition of serving seafood around Christmas, and so that was always kind of the focal point of the gathering, was to be able to enjoy seafood together.
Not like the Italian 7 fishes.
No,
No.
it was more of just enjoy the bounty that we have here in North Florida, mostly shrimp, and probably our best Christmas dinner stories revolve around one of my cats who would also enjoy the bounty of seafood and eat so much shrimp that he would wander over into the corner and pass out.
You're hanging out with Jesus and the boys, that's for sure. All those fisher people.
But yeah, mostly remember just people bringing whatever, so that there was something for everybody.
And that there is plenty. Yeah.
The French Canadian custom is for tourtière or meat pie. Christmas Eve, particularly. We are not from that tradition originally ourselves. We're strictly, turkey and mashed potatoes kind of people, but we have adopted that one. And so we always have tourtière on Christmas Eve.
I make sea pie.
Yeah.
Except that I don't have any venison or wild meat as one of the layers, because it's a layer of that and fish and yes.
Yeah.
But I always had it with a lot of my Quebecois friends. And so it's something that I do at Christmas in the same way that for Epiphany, I cook Ethiopian food to celebrate their Christmas.
Well, the whole thing is really, certainly in the Gospels, it's always about abundance and about everybody finding a place at the table and knowing that this is a central behavior for us. So it's the behavior when we gather for worship. We feed each other and we try not to make that something that we take for granted, something that we would want to remember those who are not gathered at the table. So that if a meal is our central act, then there's something implied in our own action as we leave the table, having been fed ourselves. So, so we know that the miracles of the feeding of the loaves and fishes occurs in not just Mark. So I love this photo because one of Rembrandt's most famous pieces, the storm, the painting on the storm in the Sea of Galilee, is still missing from the Gardner Museum in Boston. It was stolen and has never been recovered. And the calming of the storms of our lives, the storms, the physical storm, as well as the confronting the faith level of those who traveled with Jesus, was a part of the Rembrandt imagining of that portion of the 6th chapter of Mark. So it did make me remember, though, those who are missing, and the calm that I think we're looking for at holiday time. So last year, I guess it was, one of my daughters couldn't find an ornament that she'd had from the time that she was a child. And she was beside herself. She was frantic. She couldn't locate it, and she couldn't calm down about it either. There was no kind of, well, but if it's gone, it's gone, or I'll get another one. It was a hand-painted little gingerbread person that had her name and her birth date on it, or whatever. And eventually she found it, but I was really struck by the level of distress invested in an object. And as far as she was concerned, if that wasn't there, then Christmas was missing, and she could not be calm. So I wondered about calm at Christmas time.
I think there's a lot of pressure on us from our culture, from magazines, from advertisements, from all that sort of thing, and perhaps from our background and so on, you know, that it has to be the exact perfect Christmas. It has to have all the perfect foods, has to be decorated perfectly, all that. You know, I've been doing some reflection for Jazz Vespers on the carol, People Look East. And the line goes, make your house fair as you are able. It doesn't say make your house absolutely fair and perfect and beautiful. It says, as you are able. If your life is a mess at this present moment, then do the best you can.
Great point. Hello, Claire. I saw you come in.
I think it's important to remember that you know, you can't get too attached to any one thing that makes Christmas or makes Easter, or and travel is very good for that, because all of a sudden you're away from those comforting sameness, right? And yet, see, it's still Christmas. It still feels like Christmas too. A couple of years ago, I went to a high school reunion, and I reconnected with a lady that, you know, I knew well in high school, and we'd lost touch, and we were catching up. And anyway, it turned out that she had a teenage son who disappeared years ago, and they never found him. And it's been, you know, 25 years, something like that, maybe 20 years since he's been gone. And I think about them at Christmas. You know, when I saw that picture still missing, it must be, it's like that for them every year, and they don't even know what happened.
Classmate of mine disappeared at Yale during my freshman year, and walked out of a party and was never seen again.
And you don't want to hear "I'll be home for Christmas" one more time.
Right.
Oh, no.
Right. Because we're never all in the same place. But if we were looking for calm, if we were asking Jesus to still a storm in us from the Gospel of Mark's perspective, what would that look like? And would that be for more than just now? Is that kind of inner calm a gift of the Incarnation that we find elusive, not just at this time? I'm thinking of Megan and your deep and wonderful breaths and your yoga calm.
Need more of that than I tend to get at the holidays.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also the beauty, though, of learning to incorporate that into just any moment in particular. You know, the practice isn't about a particular space, but about moving out into the world and into life. So.
I think sometimes it's just about doing something that you really love doing, and you feel your best when you're doing it, and just making that time, an hour or whatever it is, and say, I'm going to read, in my case, a historical biography, which no one else would understand why that was a good time, but you know, or write or do cross stitch or whatever. And who cares if the house is a mess, and who cares if I should be doing something else? But that's when I feel most at peace sometimes.
I'm thinking about, well, Joe, you just finished a week with grandchildren, and lots of noise and activity. And so maybe calm is not what you're looking for.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Not so much grandchildren, but just thinking about Jesus's life. Calm was not something that applied to that at all. It doesn't, at least certainly not from Mark's gospel, and I don't think from any gospel. And but you're right. Grandchildren, we have we're just blessed with grandchildren that live very close to us. And so one of the dads is in Naval Reserves, and he decided that, well, he should go to Poland for Thanksgiving. I don't know. I'm glad he's serving the country, although what he's doing in Poland, I'm not quite sure. He's supposed to be back tonight. But we ended up with my daughter and her 5 children going to St. Augustine and, looking at the lights and having Thanksgiving dinner, and then going to see the boat parade on the St. Johns River, and, all this kind of stuff. And that is certainly not a calm bunch of folks. But it is, I wouldn't trade them for the world. I mean, it's just great. So I'm thinking that for, when we talk about, when we think about Mark's gospel and Jesus's, what he was doing, he was doing what he loved and what he was supposed to do, and at least I guess. And so I don't know, I guess we all have to figure out, what are we here for? What are we supposed to be doing? But at least I know when I'm with my grandchildren, that's at least part of it. It's not the only time, but that's certainly part of it. So,
Yeah, so relationship and connection as much as possible is a good thing. And I agree with you. I don't think there may have been one moment of calm on the Sea of Galilee, but the rest, everything else, not so much. And even looking for quiet times to breathe and pray were very short, very far between. So, but just to be aware of what it takes for us to feel the incarnation. So it may be all of the connections, or it may be peace and quiet, or it may be leaving home and entering a new environment by choice or not by choice, and to see what God has in store, because this gospel in particular has more than we expect. And this is one of the pieces that we don't expect. In Mark's gospel, along with the others, Jesus wants to talk about his upcoming death, and nobody wants to hear about it. And at least 3 times in Mark and in the other gospels as well, Jesus is saying, we're going to Jerusalem and this is what's going to happen. And the disciples were like, well, can we sit at the special chairs on either side of you? Or can we call down some lightning on people who didn't listen to us? Things like this. Whereas Jesus says I have an expiry date. And I'm going to walk toward that. And I'm going to walk beyond it as well. So incarnation means mortality. And that's a tough piece.
Can you say a little bit more about that? I'd never thought of incarnation as mortality. I mean, maybe the opposite of that. What do you?
Well, what I'm thinking is to be human is to wear out. Our bodies don't last forever. And I'm not saying that holiday time doesn't make that more poignant. It does. I mean, Melissa's mother is slipping away in Boston. And she's not young, but she's not in her 90s yet. So, you know, partially you say she's not really that old, even though she is old. And when I was growing up, 60 looked old. So, you know, but to be in human form or in any form, I guess, except unless you're an angel or a spirit, means that we will wear out. Our bodies will wear out. And there will be a time when even Pamela Cooper's good diet will not save your kidneys. That's just the truth of it. And sometimes that helps us pay more attention to how precious life is and to be grateful. Sometimes it makes us frustrated because we have so little control. Sometimes we actually pay attention to what's in front of us in the moment and give thanks for that. But I thought it was very interesting in all the Gospels, well, some more than others, where Jesus keeps saying, you need to pay attention. Of course, he's also saying you pay attention that there's more than the power of death. I have more power than the power of death. Yeah, even in the Song of Solomon, the text, the beautiful scripture says, many waters cannot quench death, neither can the floods drown it. So it's about what survives and surrounds our finitude, our humanness. And Jesus is the way he confronts everything else in Mark's gospel. He also confronts, it's like, this is somebody who's blind, and this is somebody who's deaf, and this is someone who needs healing, and this is, and death is on our horizon too, is on my horizon.
And interestingly, others don't want to talk about it. You know, we have a binder, and in it contains everything the children would need to know. They both live away from Ottawa. So it's got, you know, where's the safety deposit box? Who would need to be notified? Where's the insurance company? All that kind of thing. But when we showed them this binder, they say, fine. All right, we know where it is. Fine. Don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
They know where the binder is.
We had supper with some Jewish friends last night who were talking about death and what they were going to do. They can't, where they're going to be buried, because there's a struggle about that with his parents and her parents and so on. And she said, and, you know, we can't be cremated, so you can't spread us everywhere. So, you know, it's like, okay. But it was at least an interesting kind of open conversation about last things. And you're right, my kids don't want to know either. Doesn't matter what I say. Don't want to know.
They also don't want your living will or anything like that, but they know where it is. We had a horrible happening in Jamaica, a bit like Jim Jones, but not quite to the same extent. And there was a comedian who talked about it and said, Bishop, I know that you called me to come because we're going to go on the ark. So how are we going to get there? And the bishop said, well, you have to die. And she said, I have to die? I thought that I was just going to go into the ark and we were going to be in the beautiful Caribbean Sea, and then we'd be lifted up to milk and honey. He said, you're telling me I have to die? I'm not ready for that today, Bishop. And I thought, actually, that's how we live our life. that she was laughing, but it was absolutely true.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Linda, I've lost track of something though. I completely understand the idea that, we have to accept our bodies are simply going to go through a continuous set of changes, and then our last change on earth will be that we will die. But you had started off with making a point about the incarnation, and so I lost the connection that you made from the one to the other.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great an interesting question. I think that we are incarnate. Our souls are incarnate. I don't think perhaps what I want to say is I don't think the incarnation applies only to Jesus. So if we are marked as Christ's own forever in our baptism, if we have been loved into being by the great Creator, I feel that we're all a part of incarnation. And is that helpful, or is that not helpful? Just let me know, Michael.
It is helpful. I'm just wondering if I can completely simplify it. Would it be, I don't wish for this to sound morbid, I'm making an observation that basically our incarnation is the very, very first step towards our eventual death.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it is how we're held. Where do we see our destination? Why do we see the purpose of our creation? How do we define eternal life? All of those are, really the big Jeopardy questions. So I'm aware that I don't want to end on that note for this evening, and we're almost out of time. We are out of time. So let me just have you look at the next 4 slides briefly. One is about the purpose of our life. It kind of flows out of that wonderful question, Michael, about are we bearing fruit? And what are we doing to the planet, and so on. And how our incarnation is related to our senses. And then there was this little piece about preparing for Christmas and the wisdom of the folk wisdom about evergreen trees. And this is, of course, Jesus was having a conversation with a follower of God, and he was asking, and Jesus was questioning. They were in dialogue together about what's the best way to live. And it is the Shema. The Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your spirit and all your strength. And then Jesus adding the second commandment, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So this piece just had to do with what gospel we thought Jesus was bearing into the world, and we know that the gospel of love. And what is it that marks our coming and our going, not just our coming and going out of our houses, but our coming and going out of this life. How will we mark it? And partly we mark it by holding on to each other. I just love this painting. What it means to be in deep relationship with a community that is willing to hold each other. And those of you who have worked with me a little on the Theophany project would know that this is Yishun Loaves. He hoped in sheets. Beautiful piece on the Ascension, where Jesus is connected to the earth, above and beyond, and also the sea. So I almost got through them all. But I found that as I was approaching this gospel, rather than just only reading it, to see it visually, it landed in a different place for me with the images. And so I hope that that's been a good and interesting journey for you as well. And if you want me to send you the slides, I'm more than happy to do that. But I'm already receiving in my email 8 or 9 Advent offerings per day. Many of them art related or poetry related. And so if you've had enough, that's fine. I understand. Next week, Joe will be doing the Gospel of Luke. And again, we'll come to the final one on December the 16th with the Gospel of John that also has no baby. No infancy narrative at all. And that, while that will have art, I don't have a month to prepare another Johannine Advent calendar for you. but I learned a lot. So anything else before we go? So good to see all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda.
Talking about birthdays, this is Claire's birthday eve.
That's right. She has a birthday tomorrow.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Claire.
Thank you. I love
Up in the
everybody.
North Carolina hills.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
I love this. I'm sorry I'm late. I was on the road and I couldn't drive in the dark and tune in. So I missed it. So I definitely want the slides. And you reminded me that we get so involved with chronological time, that we lose sight of kairos, fullness of time. And I think in approaching our death or our own mortality, that, you know, maybe this is part of what Jesus was trying to explain to his apostles, is that we need to shift now into the fullness of time rather than a chronological limitation. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for this.
Claire, I'm not sure I have your email address. You always log in online. So if you could put that in the chat, please, I can make sure you get the slides.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes, I will. Thank you.
And there are at least 4 or 5 of you who didn't say anything tonight. So I just noticed. Don't think I didn't notice.
Linda, this is Claudia.
Claudia.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share one thing. Yeah, I do some spiritual direction, and I met with a 50-year-old woman yesterday that was really struggling about, oh, life is just so ordinary, and if it's not exciting, I'm not living my life. And as you spoke tonight, I just thought about how is it that we can live into the ordinariness of what is so extraordinary. And of course, I was trying to challenge her to do that, you know, at least one day in the next 3 weeks as she was talking. But I just wanted to pass that on, that all of this that applies to me personally can be extraordinary, even if it feels ordinary.
Beautiful.
So thank you.
But it's slowing down to pay attention, right? It's having Mary Oliver on one side of you, smacking you upside the head because you missed the whatever it was that was right in front of you. I mean, it's just.
It's staying awake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And saying thank you, even for the hard, even for the hard. Anybody else? Thanks so much. So good to see you. And glad 40 pieces of art or whatever it is done. I'm glad to send it along. Just let me know.
Thank you for doing it.
Okay.
Thank you,
See
Linda.
y'all. Okay. See you
Thank
next
you,
week.
Linda.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.